Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something that's, well, crucial for feeling truly connected. Intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you might be thinking romance right away,
Yeah.
but we're going to actually go broader than that, using Esther Perel's concept of intimacy.
Powerful phrase.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she's a real trailblazer in the world of relationships. She's helped so many couples rethink what a fulfilling partnership can look like.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
Absolutely.
And we've got a fantastic interview of hers to unpack. She talked with Yumi Steins
Okay.
on the Australian podcast, Ladies We Need to Talk.
Mm-hmm.
And they just really went deep on what it means to be seen and known by another person.
Yeah.
Before we jump in, though,
Right.
can you give us a quick overview of who Esther Perel is for anyone who might not be familiar?
Sure. Esther Perel is a world-renowned couples therapist and author, and she's really revolutionized the way we think about relationships. She's known for her work on infidelity, desire, and maintaining intimacy in long-term relationships.
Mm-hmm.
What's so fascinating about her work is that she doesn't shy away from difficult conversations.
Okay, so we've got this leading voice in relationships talking about intimacy.
Right.
But what exactly does she mean by intimacy? I think a lot of people might assume it's about knowing someone's deepest, darkest secrets.
Right.
Is it really that simple?
Well, it's definitely about depth, but it's more nuanced than just revealing secrets. Perel describes intimacy as this longing to be truly understood, to have someone recognize our needs and desires, sometimes even before we fully grasp them ourselves.
So it's about someone really getting you on a deeper level.
Exactly. It's like, imagine that feeling when you share a joke with someone and it lands perfectly because they just get your sense of humor. Or when your partner knows exactly what you need after a long day without you having to say a word. Those moments, those glimpses of feeling seen and understood, that's intimacy in action.
That makes so much sense. It's about feeling known and appreciated for who you truly are.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when we don't get that kind of intimacy, even when we are in a relationship?
Perel talks about how in today's world, we often experience a kind of loneliness even when we're surrounded by people.
Right.
We might be physically present, but we're not truly engaged with the person in front of us.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well.
Right.
How many times have I caught myself scrolling through my phone while having dinner with my partner?
Yeah.
We're together, but we're not really connecting.
Right, and that lack of presence, that disconnect, can chip away at intimacy over time.
That's a bit unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
So is intimacy always this serious, heavy thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes most connected I feel is when I'm just laughing with someone.
That's a great point, and Perel actually highlights this in the interview. She tells a story about two people at the gym struggling to do the same exercise move.
Mm-hmm.
They both mess it up, and they share this moment of laughter. Perel points out that even these quick, lighthearted moments of shared experience can be incredibly intimate.
So it's not always about deep conversations and baring your soul.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about that spark of recognition,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of we're in this together, even if it's just for a moment.
Precisely. And those moments can be incredibly powerful, especially when they happen spontaneously.
Yeah.
They remind us that intimacy can exist in all sorts of unexpected places.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really can. But this idea of shared moments, like fleeting or not,
Right.
it has me thinking about how we define intimacy
Yeah.
in different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
What about hookup culture, for instance?
Right.
A lot of people wonder, is it possible to find true intimacy
Yeah.
in those encounters when, there's no expectation of a longer-term relationship?
That's such a relevant question these days. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are curious about what Perel has to say on that topic.
Perel's actually quite nuanced in her approach to this.
Okay.
She acknowledges that sex can absolutely be intimate in the moment,
Okay.
even without a deeper emotional connection.
Mm-hmm.
There can be shared vulnerability, a sense of playfulness, even moments of genuine connection.
So it's not necessarily a black and white situation.
Right.
Like, hookups can never be intimate.
Right. But Perel also points out that for many women, hookups often feel unsatisfying,
Okay.
precisely because they lack that sense of someone truly delighting in them
Yeah.
as a person, beyond the physical.
It's like that intimacy is missing.
Exactly.
They might experience physical intimacy,
Right.
but not necessarily that deeper emotional connection.
Exactly. And Perel actually offers some really valuable advice for young women
Okay.
navigating this landscape.
Mm-hmm.
She encourages them to prioritize their own pleasure and well-being,
Okay.
to really get to know themselves and what they truly desire. Yeah.
In a sexual encounter. and to not settle for experiences that leave them feeling empty
Right.
or used.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah,
It's about understanding your own needs and not being afraid to communicate them.
absolutely.
And this reminds me of something else Pearl talks about, intimacy in friendships. You mentioned earlier a story about two male friends
Right.
and their intimacy ritual. Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So one of the friends reached out to Perel because he felt like his friend was pulling away,
Uh-huh.
becoming less available, and they were struggling to maintain that closeness they once shared.
So they were experiencing a kind of intimacy drift,
Yes.
even though they weren't romantically involved.
Exactly.
What did Perel suggest?
Her advice was surprisingly simple,
Okay.
but profound.
Okay.
She told them to make a point of meeting 4 times a year, just to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And during those meetings, to explicitly tell each other,
Okay.
you still matter to me. Wow, that's powerful. It's just hearing you say those words.
Yeah.
It gives me chills.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful example of how vulnerability can be a key ingredient
Yeah.
in intimate friendships as well. It's not just about shared experiences or inside jokes.
Right.
It's about actively nurturing that connection
Yeah.
and reminding each other that you're there for each other.
I completely agree. And it makes you wonder, what about long-term romantic relationships? What happens when those initial sparks of passion fade and you find yourself in a rut, feeling more like roommates than lovers?
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
Like you still care about each other,
Yeah.
but that spark, that intimacy magic,
Uh-huh.
just isn't there anymore. What does Perel say about those situations?
Well, thankfully, Perel offers a very encouraging perspective on this.
Yeah.
She says that relationships are constantly in this dance of connecting, disconnecting, and reconnecting.
Yeah.
It's a natural cycle.
Okay. So it's not about panicking when things feel a bit stale.
Yeah.
Right. It's about understanding that distance is a natural part of the process.
Exactly. And Perel emphasizes that it's those small bids for connection, those tiny attempts to reach out and engage with our partner,
Yeah.
that can make all the difference.
Okay.
She gives this great example. Imagine your partner brings you a cup of coffee in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You could simply say, thanks, which is polite, but it
Right.
doesn't really acknowledge the intention behind the gesture.
Right.
Or you could say, that was so thoughtful of you,
Yeah.
which recognizes not just the action, but the feeling behind it.
It's about acknowledging that intimacy element,
Exactly.
that they saw you and wanted to do something kind for you.
Exactly. And those small moments of recognition
Yeah.
can be so powerful in rekindling intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
It's about paying attention, being present, and appreciating those little gestures
Right.
that often go unnoticed.
That's such a valuable reminder. It's not always about grand romantic gestures.
Yep.
Sometimes it's about those everyday moments of connection. But before we move on, I
Yeah.
have to ask, can any relationship, romantic or otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
truly survive without intimacy?
Perel's stance is that intimacy is fundamentally woven into the fabric of romantic relationships.
Okay.
Of course, relationships without it can exist, but they're unlikely to thrive or bring deep fulfillment. That sense of being seen and known
Right.
is really what sets romantic love apart.
Yeah.
And to really break down the mechanics of intimacy, Perel uses this fascinating concept of verbs of intimacy.
Verbs of intimacy.
Right.
I've never thought of it that way.
It's such an intriguing concept.
Yeah.
She lists them as asking, giving, taking, receiving, sharing, playing, and refusing.
Okay.
And the key is each of these verbs can be expressed both physically and verbally.
So it's not just about what we say,
Exactly.
but how we act, how we respond,
Mm-hmm.
how we show up in the relationship.
Yeah.
It's about the full spectrum of how we interact and engage with the other person.
You got it. It's a dynamic process, and each of these verbs can have different meanings
Right.
and challenges depending on the individuals involved.
Mm-hmm.
Take taking, for example. It can be a healthy expression of desire and assertiveness,
Okay.
but it can also become problematic if it's not balanced with giving and receiving.
It makes me think about those young women Perel was talking about,
Right.
who might struggle to assert their needs and desires in sexual encounters.
Yeah.
Maybe they haven't fully embraced the taking aspect of intimacy.
That's a great connection. And it highlights how understanding these verbs
Yeah.
can help us pinpoint specific areas
Mm-hmm.
where we might need to grow
Okay.
or shift our approach to intimacy.
Right. This whole conversation has been so eye-opening.
It has.
It's like we've unlocked a whole new language
Mhm.
for understanding intimacy.
It really is a fascinating way to think about it.
Yeah.
And before we wrap up, Peril also addressed maintaining intimacy in non-romantic relationships. Her advice: actively participate in each other's life stages. If your friend is starting a family, find ways to connect with that part of their life. Offer to babysit. Engage with their kids.
Right.
Show genuine interest.
It's about bridging those gaps
Yeah.
and staying connected even as our lives take different paths.
Mm-hmm.
This deep dive has given me so much to reflect on, and I hope it has for our listeners as well. It
Yeah.
really is. It's about, finding those points of connection, no matter how big or small. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on intimacy, and I hope our listeners feel the same way. As we wrap up this deep dive into intimacy,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway you hope everyone walks away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that intimacy is an active process. It's not something that just happens to us, you know? It's something we cultivate through our actions and our words,
Mm-hmm.
and even, our willingness to be vulnerable, whether it's expressing appreciation to your partner, making time for meaningful conversations with friends,
Mm-hmm.
or simply being fully present in your interactions. Like, every small step counts.
So it's not about waiting for those magical intimacy moments to appear.
Right.
It's about creating them.
Exactly. It's about being intentional, being present, and being willing to put in the effort
Mm-hmm.
to nurture those deep connections that bring so much meaning to our lives. And remember, it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about showing up authentically and being willing to grow.
That's such a great reminder. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of disconnect.
For sure.
But the key is to keep trying, keep communicating, and keep that spark of connection alive.
Absolutely. And as you go about your day, maybe ask yourself, which verb of intimacy am I focusing on right now?
Oh, like that.
Am I asking for what I need? Am I giving generously? Am I receiving with an open heart?
Mm-hmm.
Just bringing that awareness to your interactions
Yeah.
can make a world of difference.
I love that. What a fantastic takeaway for our listeners. And I'll add one more question to ponder. How might thinking of intimacy as a language change the way you approach your relationships?
It's an ongoing conversation.
It really is. Well, this deep dive has been so insightful. A huge thank you to you and to all of our amazing listeners for joining us on this journey of exploration. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, and remember, intimacy is a gift we give not only to others, but also to ourselves.